Hello everyone, welcome to UGC 112, World Civilizations 2. This is Lecture 10, the Ottoman Empire. So obviously today we're going to be talking about the Ottoman Empire that grew in Anatolia, what we call today modern-day Turkey, and would grow to control much of the Middle East, North Africa, even into some parts of Europe. You could just see how vast this empire would be, which is all very impressive, especially for a bunch of footrests. Wait, that doesn't seem quite right. No, these are not Ottomans like what you rest your feet on. Instead, these are Ottoman Turks. But before we get into the Ottoman Empire, we should do a quick recap of Islam. So around 600, Muhammad began to preach a new religion. A new religion in which he was the final prophet of God, and some of the other prophets included Abraham, Moses, Jesus. So this is in that tradition that the Jewish faith, Christianity, and now obviously Islam is going to come from. Islam itself means submission, and in this context, submission to God. And then a Muslim, someone who, follows Islam, means one who submits. So again, one who submits to God. Now here you can see the territory that Muhammad held during his lifetime in this dark orange, even the tip of Oman, and this included the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. Mecca, where he was originally from, forced to flee to Medina, later would return to Mecca. And so his religion and his followers spread pretty quickly during his lifetime, and then after his death too. You could see after his death they extend out this way, and then furthermore out here into even Spain and the Indus River, so just the very north of India into what is modern-day Pakistan. Of course, you can also see here there were two unsuccessful attempts to take Constantinople, which was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. So two different times they tried to take that, both unsuccessful. Now, the death of Muhammad also brought about a split in Islam. Two different sects would arise. One would be the Sunni, who, among other things, believed that religious leaders should be different from the rulers of the states. And then the Shiites, who believed that the religious leaders should also rule the state. So the Sunni believed that there should be separate leaders, whereas the Shiites believed they should all be wrapped up in the same person. And furthermore, these men who should rule, according to the Shiites, should be descendants of Muhammad. So now we're going to get into the Turks. And our first group of Turks are a group called the Seljuk Turks. These are Turkish people who migrated into the Persian Empire, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next lecture, the Persians, that is. But basically, they're located right around here, what is modern-day Iran. So the Seljuk Turks migrated into the Persian Empire, and along the way as they were moving in, they converted to Islam, the Sunni sect. And over time, the Seljuks would control much of the Islamic world. This actually is the Seljuk Empire here. You can see it stretches far into Asia up here. They have some of the Arabian Peninsula down here. They also take much of Anatolia, come to control that. Now, over time, as empires do, they began to decline, and when they did this, their empire began to fracture apart, and Anatolia itself broke into independent beyliks, and these were ruled by beys, which is kind of like a lord or a chief, but these are little independent states ruled by these strong figures. So beyliks ruled by beys, and these are Turkish beys. And perhaps, of course, the most famous Turkish bey of them all, there he is, Nusret Gökçe, who of course is Salt Bey. Yeah. Back to the Seljuks and these independent beyliks, we're going to focus right up here, towards the northwestern part of Anatolia. That's going to be a beylik that's going to intrigue us for the rest of this lecture, because it's there that a tribal leader named Osman founded his bey. And at first you could see it's rather small. That's his original beylik. And so Osman is the founder of this beylik, which would become the Ottoman Empire. So that's where he started, this dark red, and then by the end of his lifetime they've expanded out to here. And a fun fact about Osman, his name means bone breaker. How awesome is that? Bone breaker. And whenever I, remember this, it always reminds me of the character Bonesaw that the Macho Man Randy Savage played in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. There's Bonesaw right there. So this beylik came to be named after him. You can see it, the Osmanulan, in the earlier one, the Osmanulan beylik, and it was a frontier area between the Islamic world of the old Seljuk Empire and the Christian world of the Byzantine Empire, and further along past that, the rest of Europe. And this made it a bit of a rougher and more aggressive area, right? This is kind of a territory that was often disputed between the Islamic world and the Christian world. His forces consisted of, not surprisingly, Turks, but also some renegade Byzantines. Many of them would convert to Islam, but not all of them had to. One of the major warrior families of the early Ottoman Empire actually came from a Byzantine convert named Michael Kossis. That's his name in the Greek. In Turkish, he would be known as Kruse Mihal. And he's got quite a clan that would develop from him that would be very, very important in the early Ottoman Empire. So basically, the Ottomans were pretty inclusive of anyone who wanted to join them, right? I mean, it was more about political expediency than, strong religious convictions. They were very, very Islamic, don't get me wrong there, but if you wanted to join in with them, you didn't have to be a Muslim. Under Osman, the group expanded its territory quite a bit. They originally were just kind of raiders, and eventually they began to hold on to this land. And you can see, again, there's that expansion by the time he dies in 1326. But that land that they're expanding into had been part of the Byzantine Empire. They're not really challenging the other beyliks, the other Turkish beyliks at this time, because they were very, very strong. So they're just kind of picking off little bits of the Byzantine Empire, which has been in decline for about, around 100 years now. So they're just kind of reaping on that. After Osman, the Ottomans continued to expand first, again into Byzantine territory in Anatolia, but then against some of the Beyliks as well. So you can see them expanding into this way, into some of those Beyliks. Then they moved on into the Balkans, and this here is the Balkans. There's more of Anatolia that they're expanding into as well. And specifically the Balkans are this area here, just above Greece, below modern-day Turkey, or below modern-day Hungary and Ukraine. One of the major battles for the Balkans was the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. They fought against Serbians, and it was kind of actually a stalemate. Both sides had heavy losses, but the Ottoman Turks just had a little bit, they were able to recover easier, and so Serbia then became a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. And here is a 16th century Russian depiction of the Battle of Kosovo there. Another major battle in their quest for the Balkans was the Battle of Nicopolis. This was along the Danube River, fought in 1396. It's in modern-day Bulgaria, and it's roughly right about there. So the Danube here splitting Bulgaria and Romania, it's roughly right around here. That's where Nicopolis is. By this time, much of the Balkans had fallen to the Ottoman Empire, even though it's only been like 7 years. After Kosovo, the Ottomans just kept gaining more and more territory into the Balkans. So, they were a major threat in the area. By this time, the Byzantine Empire is really just Constantinople and the small area around it. They've gone completely around it. Remember, the Ottoman Empire controlled this area here, and they would control much of the Balkans. So they had control of pretty much everything that the old Byzantine Empire had, except for Constantinople itself. Because of this threat into the Balkans and, possibly into Europe further, the Pope called for a crusade against the Ottoman Turks. He called it during the 100 Years' War, so Europe had been fighting with each other for a long time. But there's a slight break in the 100 Years' War, and an army was assembled. There were men included from the Holy Roman Empire, Hungary, France, England, Venice, Genoa, Croatia, Bulgaria. So it was the force came from a lot of different areas. But that had its negative sides too. So not only did you have this force, from all these people who, answered the Pope's call, but because they were so diverse, they really didn't see eye to eye often. And in fact, they didn't bring siege weapons with them. So they couldn't take Nicopolis because they didn't have the tools to do so. They couldn't lay a strong siege. And that allowed the Ottoman Sultan, what was their name for the king, the Ottoman Sultan to arrive, and his Serbian allies. So the Europeans didn't agree to bring siege weapons. They also couldn't agree on proper tactics to fight the Ottomans. The Hungarian king Sigmund said, we just need the French to attack this certain area at this time, and the Hungarians will come around this way. But the French really didn't see eye to eye with him, and they said, no, that would not be honorful, so they wanted to do their own thing, and it was just kind of chaos, and the Europeans get routed. And here we see actually a later French depiction. This is from 1475, somewhere around there, of the Battle of Nicopolis. So there's the battle of, and then at the bottom, this French painter included this massacre of the prisoners by the Sultan. You can see the Sultan here ordering the massacre of these European prisoners. In fact, only the nobles were left to be ransomed. Anybody else was slaughtered. Now, what this French artist left out was that the reason why the Sultan slaughtered all of these prisoners was because the Crusaders had executed all of their prisoners when they saw the Sultan coming. So it was a retaliation. Usually the Ottomans were very lenient towards their captives, the people that they took in war. Some would become slaves, obviously, but others would be, free to live on the land for the Ottoman Empire. But not this case, because those Crusaders had massacred their prisoners, the Sultan did the same thing and just slaughtered his own. And this leads to the idea that the Ottomans were conquerors, not destroyers. They wanted to rule over areas, not, just lay waste and wreak havoc on them. They forced the locals to swear loyalty to the Ottoman Empire and to pay taxes, but the locals could keep their religion. All they had to do was just pay a slightly higher tax to do so. Now, they did force the locals to submit their sons to devshirme. And devshirme is the system where Christian boys were taken from their families to be raised in the Ottoman Empire. And there's a couple reasons for this. One, they served as hostages, right? If you have the sons of, especially the major families of an area, that hopefully will keep the loyalty. Another aspect of devshirme was it became a form of recruitment and acculturation into the Ottoman Empire. So these boys were raised, the ages were from 8 to 18. They were taken there, raised in the Ottoman Empire, and, then they become familiar with the Ottoman way of life. And yeah, so it's a system of recruitment, and I'm going to get into this in just a moment. Began in the mid-1300s by the Sultan Murad I, and it was a way to help curb the Turkish nobles. He didn't want the nobles to be too strong, so what he did was he looked for a way to curb them, and devshirme became this practice. So what happened was these Christian boys, if they were unskilled, of low birth, they would work the farms in the Ottoman Empire until they were of age to join the main military. So, just your everyday soldier. For those, who showed exceptional skill, and those of high birth, they would live with Muslim families, and they would be, if they converted, they could attend a school to become a janissary. And a janissary was this very, very elite infantry in the Ottoman Empire. They kind of served as guards for the Sultan, but they were also like the main attack force in the Ottoman Empire. Highly skilled because they were, recruited from greatly skilled young men. Now, for those who converted and were skilled in governing, they could continue on to the palace school instead of joining the janissaries. And the palace school was also open to Turks as well. There they could become teachers or administrators, and then the very best of the best would go on to become viziers. And these viziers they entered the bureaucracy around the Sultan. So the Sultan, instead of surrounding himself by Turkish nobles, had this vast bureaucracy made of viziers, many of whom were part of Devshirme. And at the very, very top of this is the title of Grand Vizier. And the Grand Vizier was the second strongest man in the Ottoman Empire. He was the Sultan's right-hand man, and as we will see, he would often be recruited through Devshirme, not through the Turkish elites. Early on, they were Turkish elites, but over time, they would come more and more from Devshirme. And here's a painting of a Janissary by the Venetian painter Gentile Bellini, who had spent a year in the Ottoman Empire at the request of the Sultan. So Devshirme was technically limited to the boys, the Christian boys. Girls weren't part of that, but Christian girls could be taken from their families and were often forced to join harems of leading Turkish nobles or the Sultan himself. In fact, after the Battle of Kosovo, which we just talked about, some of the daughters of the Serbian nobles did become concubines of the Sultan. So multiple daughters of multiple nobles in Serbia entered this kind of marriage to the Sultan. The Sultan who brought Gentile Bellini to the Ottoman Empire was this man here, Mehmed II, and this is actually a portrait of him by Bellini that he made during his time there. And Mehmed II was also the one who appointed who was the first to really appoint Grand Viziers from Devshirme instead of Turkish nobles. So this helped, obviously, to make the bureaucracy larger and more reliant on Devshirme. And he became known as Mehmed the Conqueror. Wait, that doesn't sound quite right. In fact, I'm gonna say he should be called Mehmed the Conqueror. If not alone for his conquest of Constantinople, which we'll go into in just a moment in greater detail. But Constantinople, the taking of it, is a major point in history. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. Basically, the only people who have taken Constantinople in its history from the founding by Constantine through Mehmed was in 1204. Some crusaders were able to just break in enough to take over the city, to loot it, hold on to it for a little bit, and then they were kicked out pretty shortly after. Remember, you saw the two different invasions by the followers of Muhammad after he had died. The Umayyad dynasty tried to take it twice, weren't able to do it. The Russians tried a few times. People from the Balkans tried. It was very, very difficult to take Constantinople. But he is able to not just take it, he's able to then hold on to it. So that alone should be enough merit to be called Mehmed the Conqueror. But on top of that, he also conquered more of Serbia than they had already held. A major part of Greece, the Peloponnesus, which is this area right down here, was a state called Morea. He was able to take the Beyliks along the Black Sea, so up here, expanding there. Bosnia, which was in the Balkans, roughly right around here, Bosnia. And Albania, which is right around here in the Balkans as well. And, of course, the Crimea and the areas around it. So quite a bit of conquering that Mehmed does. Now, of course, I just said Constantinople was the major focal point of his conquest. Remember, Constantinople is right here, right where Europe meets meets what is now Turkey, Anatolia. So it's the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and at the mouth of the Black Sea, pouring out into the Mediterranean Sea. So right there is Constantinople. Very strategic place, just slightly on the European side of those straits. At the time when he was taking Constantinople in 1453, Mehmet was only 21 years old. It's pretty amazing. The Ottomans brought a force with them of around 50 to 80,000 people, and the Byzantines tried to defend their city with around 7,000. And of those 7,000, 2,000 were foreigners. So they were pretty much outnumbered 10 to 1. The Byzantines were. The Ottomans outnumbered them 10 to 1. And yet, it's the siege lasted still 53 days. Now, why? Why did it do this? You're outnumbering them 10 to 1. Why? Well, the city had incredible defenses. For the first part, 3 sides of it were surrounded by water, right? So we can see water on 3 sides of it. It's on a little peninsula. And then furthermore, there was a wall around the entire city. So here's the wall, of course, on the land side, and it stretches all the way across here. So all the city is walled off. And this land part here, the land wall of Theodosius, was just massive. Furthermore, to protect this little area here, they had a chain going across the water so that ships couldn't get in and try and flank the city. Here you can see a reconstruction of what the wall sought to look like. There's this giant moat here. There's an outer wall, a little area between the then inner wall. Very, very tall walls as well. And these are actually some of the remains today. You can see the moat being transformed into an area for gardening, planting crops. There's the inner wall, or the outer wall, and then behind it the large inner wall with the giant towers. So the Ottomans lay siege to the city. They tried to blockade the port as much as they could. So they set up their ships all around here, not letting anything get in. Tried to stop things going through the Bosphorus, which this way goes up to the Black Sea there. They actually took their ships overland this way to then have ships in the Golden Horn too, and attacked the ships, the ships that the Byzantines had here. So they took 70 ships and transported them overland to be able to hold that area there. They built bridges. Here's one of the bridges. And they built fortresses around the city as well, so that they could maintain this siege. They also used cannons. Remember when we talked about exploration and I said that the fall of Constantinople was a major selling point for cannons? People had been using cannons before. They understood the benefits of them, but the sheer power of cannons was really shown in this fall of Constantinople. So they have lots of these regular cannons, but among these cannons was also the Great Bombard, which was just a massive, massive gun. It shot these giant stones that were around 600 pounds that had a diameter of 2 feet. The cannon itself was almost 27 feet long, and it had actually been designed by a Hungarian man named Orban. And he had tried to sell his plans to the Byzantine Emperor, but the Byzantine Empire had been in such a decline that the emperor couldn't afford it. He didn't have the resources to then make it either. So Orban then took his plans to Mehmed II, who had quite a bit of money, paid Orban, and then gave him the materials he needed to build this. This here actually, in the picture, is the Dardanelles gun, which was made in 1464, so just 11 years after the Great Bombard was made, and it's thought to be based on the original Great Bombard by Orban. This gun was still used by the Turks in 1807, so it had a long life. The Dardanelles gun did, and it's all based on the idea of the actual execution of this Great Bombard that was used to blow holes into these massive walls. Another problem for the Byzantines was that they asked for help from people. They're like, oh no, the Ottoman Empire is trying to take us over. They asked for help from Europe, and their allies just didn't come, so they weren't helped out. The final assault began just after midnight on May 29th, and then through that fighting, the Ottomans were able to break into the city. Constantine XI, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, either died in battle or he hanged himself. There are a couple different accounts of how he died, but he doesn't make it through the Ottoman attack. His two nephews, however, he had no children, so his two nephews would have been the next in line for the Byzantine Empire. They were taken and raised in the Ottoman Empire, and they in fact reached high positions. So they were basically recruited into Devshirme, right? The younger of his two nephews actually became Grand Vizier twice, under Bayezid II, who was Mehmed's son. So after 3 days of looting, Mehmed gave his troops 3 days to loot the city. Mehmed called them out of the city, and he looked around, and there was quite a bit of ruin then. But he satisfied his troops by letting them, take some riches. He then restored houses and property to the Byzantines who were still willing to live in the city. So he said, if you're willing to live in the city under my rule, you can have your houses back, and I will get, as much of your property back as I can. So these Byzantines were allowed to live there as long as they agreed to be part of the Ottoman Empire. And for the houses that were left, unoccupied, he offered those to other people throughout his empire to come move into the city, and to give them even more incentive, he offered tax breaks to them. And the idea was to repopulate this great city. He rebuilt the walls, rebuilt other parts of the cities like the markets, and he had the wealthy people of his empire help pay for the building of infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the walls. There was also a wave of building Islamic buildings. So they either just built them outright, out of on the ruins, or they converted old buildings into Islamic ones. This here is the Hagia Sophia, which was the Church of Holy Wisdom. It had been originally built in 537 by Justinian. That then became the Hagia Sophia, the mosque that was Hagia Sophia. And you can see the minarets that were added there. Mehmed also built himself a palace in the city. This was the Topkapi Palace, which was then, going to, this was basically saying that this city that I've taken, this, famous city, Constantinople, is now going to be my capital for my Ottoman Empire. He builds this massive palace there. You can see just how large it is there. He also encouraged trade to come through the city as much as he could. He's really trying to revitalize this city because he wants to make it his capital, right? Repopulating it with people, building up the defenses and the other structures around it, making it Islamic while also still allowing Christianity to stay there in some areas. Obviously the Hagia Sophia was converted, but there were still Christian churches there. And tried to, revive the economy of Constantinople as well. Mehmed tied himself so much to the city that he actually had his tomb built in it as well. This really was the crowning jewel for Mehmed. And so he had his tomb built in this mosque that he built called the Faith Mosque. And the Faith Mosque was built over the second largest and second most important church in the city. It was called the Church of the Holy Apostles. But it had been kind of, in decline, wasn't that in great condition after the capture of Constantinople. So on top of its ruins, he built this new mosque called the Faith Mosque and put his tomb there. And this is his tomb. You can still visit the tomb of Mehmed II. So if we're talking about his tomb, obviously Mehmed dies. He died in 1481, and then two of his sons fought each other for a succession. You had Bayezid, who was the eldest and had been kind of groomed as the heir. And then you had Jem. Jem was Bayezid's half-brother. He raised an army up in Egypt, but when he fought Bayezid, his forces were defeated, and he fled to the west. When he got to the west, he was imprisoned by the Pope, and in fact, Bayezid would pay the Pope to keep him prisoner, right? Because he didn't want another claimant to the throne. In terms of struggles for succession, being imprisoned in the West is that's one of the better ways that people got out. It was not uncommon for sultans, to blind or kill or disfigure their brothers so that they couldn't be sultan themselves. So Jem, imprisoned in the West. It's not great, but the fate that some of the brothers of sultans met could be worse. So, despite this, all that I just said, Bayezid paying the Pope to keep his brother imprisoned, Bayezid actually would be known as the Just. And he gets this because of his focus on domestic issues in the Ottoman Empire. You'll remember in 1492, with the rise of Isabella and Ferdinand, the Reconquista, where they drove out the Muslim Moors from Spain, and they also expelled their Jewish population. Bayezid invited these people, these Jews and Muslims expelled from Spain, to settle into the Ottoman Empire. And these people brought with them, new ideas, new forms of craftsmanship, and they were really a boon for the Ottoman Empire, just because of the diversity that they brought in. And this was all part of Bayezid's domestic policies that allowed a multi-ethnic and a multi-religious Ottoman Empire. He saw the value in other ways of thinking, other cultures. As long as they were loyal to the Ottoman Empire, Bayezid was fine with them. Bayezid was forced into retirement by his son Selim, and there's Selim there. Selim ruled from 1412 to 1420, and he earned the nickname the Grim. He led quite a bit of conquest during his time. He was able to take Egypt, Syria, Palestine, as well as the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. While he was trying to expand further, he actually died on campaign. He became sick and died. And let's go back to his nickname, the Grim, really quickly. He got that nickname, well, you can see from this picture, he looks just rather pleasant, doesn't he? Oh, man. That's hysterical. You just wonder who he's staring at and what's happening to that poor person. But he got the nickname due to his temper. He had many of his viziers executed, and it was actually a popular curse in his lifetime and after his lifetime in the Ottoman Empire that, you know, if you didn't like somebody, you'd say, "May you be a vizier of Selim." Basically, you know, it's a way of like kind of saying like go to hell. You know, I hope that you are in just a terrible position where you're probably going to die. So that was a popular curse in the Ottoman Empire after Selim. And here you can see now the Ottoman Empire after Selim's death. And Selim's reign really set the stage for his son, who would succeed him. And his son was a man named that we in the West call Suleiman the Magnificent. He reigned from 1520 to 1566. This makes him the longest reigning sultan. It's under him that the Ottoman Empire also reached its greatest extent. So, longest reign, greatest extent under him. Those are some pretty good reasons for being called magnificent. He drove the Portuguese out of the Red Sea. You'll remember the Portuguese had been, during their exploration, just kind of setting up shop everywhere. Drove the Portuguese out of the Red Sea. He defeated the Safavids in Persia, so he was able to take territory from them. He expanded further into North Africa. He made great territorial gains in Europe, including much of Hungary. So he expanded outside of the Balkans, even more into Europe. And he probably would have kept going further, except he was stopped in 1529 at the Siege of Vienna. In part because of bad weather, but the Austrians were able to hold him off at Vienna, and Suleiman holds on to the lands that he had already won, doesn't really get to advance any further into Europe after that. He also took control of most of the Greek islands, though he never got Crete, which is that really big Greek island. And when he tried to expand over the islands in the west, wasn't very successful there either. He failed taking Malta, which is just below Sicily. I wasn't able to take Malta. So here is the empire under Suleiman the Magnificent. You can see it growing further up this way. There's Vienna where he tried to take, just couldn't take it. Malta is this little island right here. Wasn't able to take that. There's Crete that he wasn't able to take. But still, massive gains into the Middle East, in North Africa, Europe. But he wasn't just magnificent in war. In fact, like I said, we in the West remember him as Suleiman the Magnificent. The Turks remember him as Suleiman the Lawgiver. He reformed law, education, and taxes. He kind of made the traditional Turkish law and Sharia law of Islam work together. That's why he is given the name the Lawgiver there. And he was very, very successful, in part, especially against the Europeans, because the Ottomans were very unified. The Europeans are constantly fighting each other during this time in the Middle Ages and, the late Middle Ages, early modern period. And part of that unity that was felt in the Ottoman Empire was because society was really based around the Sultan. He owned all the land, which doesn't sound much different from Europe, right? Supposedly the king owned all the land. And in fact, like the European leaders, he gave out parcels of the land to nobles. These parcels were called a timar. So if you had a parcel, it was called a timar. But unlike the European feudal system, when a noble died, that piece of land returned back to the Sultan, who then gave it out to another noble. It could be their kids, but it could be a different noble completely. And so we don't see, like we did in Europe, where these families begin to hold on to the same piece of land. Once a noble dies, it passes on to that noble's kids, and the growing power of the nobles then through that system. Instead, this land just keeps coming back to the Sultan, and he can keep giving it out as he pleases. At least that's, during the height of the Ottoman Empire, that's what was happening. The Sultan was also in charge of appointing the main governmental and military officials. Sure, he would have advice, from councils, from viziers and whatnot, but the decision came down to him. Same is true of provincial governors, right? They play an important part in the government, so not surprisingly, provincial governors are also chosen by the Sultan. And to fill these positions of governors, the Sultan had a very, very large pool, because almost all the sultans had, just a number of concubines who gave him multiple children. Suleiman was weird in the sense that he only had one wife. She was actually originally from Europe, so he had one wife, which was really, really different. But the rest of the sultans had concubines, and they gave him many, many children. He could take those children and then, use them to appoint for governors and, appoint them as governors of provinces. And this was a way of training those children, to see if they were, to give them some experience in ruling, and then he could also kind of see which one might be the best to succeed him. Of course, having many different children also proved to be a weakness, because when a sultan did die, there was often struggles for succession between the children. Just as we saw after Mehmed, you had Bayezid and Jem. That was not the only case. And again, like I said, Jem got off lucky by being imprisoned. Some people were, blinded or horribly disfigured, mysteriously vanish, so on and so forth. So this kind of fighting for succession played a major role in the decline of the Ottomans, a key factor into the decline of the Ottomans. But we should note that this is a very, very slow decline over many years, and it's hard for any empire to maintain its status for a long time. In general, what we see are the sultans who did become sultan. They seemed less prepared for ruling over as time went on. In fact, Suleiman's son and successor, he got the nickname. His name was Selim, and he got the nickname the Drunkard because he cared more about having fun than ruling. And he was not the only one who would not be a great sultan. So sultans seemed less prepared and less willing to hold on to a lot of power, and this allowed the nobles around them to gain more and more power. And so we see the state becoming less centralized. We just talked about how the strength of the Ottoman Empire was how everything was going through the Sultan. Over time, the nobles gained more in power, so the Sultan had less control over these elements. You'll also recall during the lecture on exploration how I said that one of the major reasons Portugal was trying to find a way to India and the rest of Asia was because the traditional trade routes went through Constantinople, right, which had been taken over by the Ottoman Empire. Well, when they did get to India and they did get to Asia, that shifted the trade routes, right? No longer were these trade routes going through Constantinople as important as they once were. So the Ottoman Empire lost a great source of taxes that way. Great revenue source dried up when trade routes began to change. In 1571, the Ottomans lost a major battle. It's called the Battle of Lepanto. It was the largest naval battle at the time since antiquity. So it had roughly around 400 warships fighting it out. And this was a setback. So this is obviously during the time of Selim the Drunkard. And it slowed down the Ottoman expansion greatly. Just kind of like the siege of Malta, the failed siege of Malta did, and the first siege of Vienna, right? First siege of Vienna stopped the Ottomans moving into Europe. Malta stopped them from expanding in the Mediterranean, as did this this battle at Lepanto. Despite that setback, around 100 years later, the Ottomans were able to finally take Crete, the large island of Greece, right there. So they were able to take that in 1669. They again tried to take Vienna in 1683, and again they failed. In this war against the Austrians and their allies, they eventually were forced to sign the Treaty of Karlowitz. And the Treaty of Karlowitz took away some of the lands in the Balkans from the Ottoman Empire. And this was the first major loss of land in Europe that the Ottoman Empire had experienced. From the time they were expanding on, the initial expansion after Osman, this was the first major loss of land in Europe since that time. So, Treaty of Karlowitz, pretty big deal in 1699. Another change was that, we'll get into this a little bit later, about the West industrializing. So the West begins to industrialize, but the Turks never really did, under the Ottoman Empire. At least not to the same rate that the West did. So they fell behind that. And eventually, the Ottoman Empire kind of is seen as this backwater relic, of a time long gone. In fact, by the mid-19th century, the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas I, he described the Ottoman Empire as a very, very sick man, one who was gravely ill. And so from this, they became known as the sick man of Europe, just kind of lingering there, but, no real power compared to some of the other countries. But despite this, it should be noted that, they were still around in the 20th century. It's a very, very long, a long-lived empire. The Ottoman Empire didn't disappear until they were on the losing side of World War I, and then reforms that came after that. So, decline is inevitable, basically. The Ottomans felt it, but they had many, many amazing years of success. So with that, we'll end here on the Ottomans. The next lecture, we're going to talk about the Persians and India. So these groups that we've talked about, tangentially in this lecture, we'll go into more detail next time. This is Greg, signing out.